Africa is arguably the most diverse continent on Earth. With over 11.7 million square miles of land, the continent is rich in biodiversity, featuring forest, woodland, savanna, grassland, desert, wetland, and marine ecosystems. Before the European landed ashore, Africa was home to hundreds of vibrant, dynamic cultures populating all parts of the vast continent. For instance, within those regions we today call West or Central Africa, different groups distinguish themselves from one another through a complex range and combination of languages, religions, arts, technology, and evolving worldviews. The African continent continued on its own path of development without significant external intervention until the 15th century. In fact, some of the world's other great civilizations like the Kush in present-day Sudan, Aksum in present-day Ethiopia, Mali, and Great Zimbabwe flourished in Africa in the years before the 1500. During this early period, Africans participated in extensive international trading networks and transoceanic travel. It may interest you to know that some African states had established important trading relations with India, China, and other parts of Asia long before these were disrupted by European intervention. Trade routes traversed north and south, linking the Sahara with the savanna to the south as well as to the forested regions of the continent. The best known of these ancient trade routes were those crossing the Sahara. For centuries, caravans of Arab and Berber traders transported Africa, trekking along a series of arduous stages to the slave markets of North Africa, the Mediterranean, Asia, and Europe. During the 13th and 14th century, gold from the great empires of West Africa like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai provide the means for the economic takeoff of Europe. This was when the Europeans started having unusual interest in Africa. Once they knew that Africa was a wealthy continent with abundant gold, early European explorers started their voyages to Africa. During this time, there was no major centralized state in many parts of Africa. It was a society where there was no great division of wealth and power. There was a democratic system of leadership by councils of elders and other kinship and age-based institutions. The Ethiopian kingdom, for instance, was unusual because the Orthodox Christian Church, which was of ancient origin in that region, had increasingly important state functions. Also in Mali and in some other areas of Western and Eastern Africa, as well as throughout North Africa, Islam had already begun to play a significant role before 1500. Most importantly, African societies were following their own patterns of development before the onset of European intervention. You see, Africa is the cradle of civilization that made an immense contribution to the world. The most notable example is Kemet, the original name of ancient Egypt, which first developed in the Nile Valley more than 5,000 years ago and was one of the first monarchies. Even before the rise of Egypt, an even earlier kingdom was founded in Nubia. Tarseti is one of the earliest states in history. Its existence demonstrates that thousands of years ago, Africans were developing some of the most advanced political systems anywhere in the world. Egypt was already civilized before colonization. During this time, Egypt has great monuments, feats of architecture and engineering like the planning and subsequent construction of the pyramid. Egypt also made great advances in other fields. For instance, they produced early types of paper, devised a written script, and developed a calendar. They made important contributions in various branches of mathematics such as geometry and algebra, and It seems likely that they understood and perhaps invented the use of zero. They also made important contributions to mechanics, philosophy, and agriculture, especially irrigation. In medicine, for instance, the Egyptians understood the body's dependence on the brain more than 1,000 years before the Greek scholars came up with the same idea. Some historians now believe that Egypt had an important influence on ancient Greece, pointing to the fact that Greek scholars such as Pythagoras and Archimedes studied in Egypt, and that the works of Aristotle and Plato was largely based on earlier Egyptian scholarship. For example, what is commonly known as Pythagoras' theorem was well known to the ancient Egyptians hundreds of years before the birth of Pythagoras. The Benin Empire, the present-day Benin City, was once the capital of a pre-colonial African empire located in what is now southern Nigeria. The Benin Empire was one of the oldest and most highly developed states in West Africa, dating back to the 11th century. According to the Guinness Book of Records, the walls of Benin City and its surrounding kingdom was one of the world's largest earthworks carried out prior to the mechanical era. With its mathematical layout and earthworks longer than the Great Wall of China itself, Benin City was one of the best planned cities in the world. According to estimates by scientists, Benin City's wall were at 1.4 times longer than the Great Wall of China and consumes 100 times more materials than the Great Pyramid of Cheops. Situated on the plain, Benin City was enclosed by massive walls in the south and deep ditches in the north. Beyond the city walls, different other walls were erected that separated the surroundings of the capital into around 500 distinct villages. These walls extended for about 16,000 kilometers in all, in a mosaic of more than 5,000 interconnected settlement boundaries. They covered 6,500 square kilometers and were all dug by the Edo people. They took an estimated 150 million hours of digging to construct, and perhaps the largest single archaeological phenomenon on the planet. Benin City was also one of the first cities to have a semblance of street lighting. Huge metal lamps, many feet high, were built and placed around the city, especially near the king's palace. These lamps were fueled by palm oil. Their burning wicks were lit at night to provide illumination for traffic to and from the palace. When the Portuguese first discovered the Benin Empire, now the city of Benin, in 1485, they were stunned to find this vast kingdom made of hundreds of interlocked cities and villages in the middle of the African jungle. They call it the Great City of Benin at a time when there were hardly any other places in Africa the Europeans acknowledged as city. The Mali Empire was also a powerful pre-colonial African empire stretching through modern-day Mali, Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Senegal, the Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Northern Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire. Mali was famous for its trade in gold, and the empire became incredibly wealthy. During the medieval period, it is estimated that 2/3 of the world's gold originated from Mali. Some historians have even described Mansa Musa, who ruled the Mali Empire from 1312 to 1337, as one of the wealthiest men who has ever lived. Under his leadership, many schools, universities, and libraries were built, and the empire doubled in size, expanding into the important trading city of Timbuktu and Gao. In fact, Mansa Musa was so wealthy that when he went on his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he gifted people so much gold in Cairo that the city went into inflation that took it 10 years to recover from. The Great Zimbabwe is a ruined city in the southeastern hills of today's Zimbabwe. It was one of the most influential kingdoms during the pre-colonial era. It was the capital city of the Kingdom of Zimbabwe during the country's late Iron Age. Construction of the monument began in the 11th century and continued until the 15th century. The exact identity of the Great Zimbabwe builders is at present unknown. It was part of a large and wealthy global trading network. Archaeologists have found pottery from China and Persia, as well as Arab coins in the ruins there. The elite of the Zimbabwe Empire controlled trade up and down the East African coast. However, the city was largely abandoned by the 15th century as the Shonan people migrated elsewhere. The exact reasons for the abandonment are unknown, but it is likely that exhaustion of resources and overpopulation were contributing factors. Africa history before the transatlantic slave trade is one of great empires and kingdoms. Many of its inhabitants lived in societies with no great state apparatus. Many of these societies were small scale, occupied with farming, herding, and producing enough from agriculture to survive and exchange in local markets. They could also be part of larger empires and as such were expected to produce a surplus or perform other duties for an overlord. While these societies varied greatly and were governed in different ways, they were all developing according to their own internal dynamics. For instance, the Igbos, who still live in Nigeria, are an example of a society that was not part of a centralized state. They operate what was described as an acephalous society, that is, a society without a governing ruler or chief. They are governed by councils of elders or by other kingship or age-based institutions. As in many other African societies that use similar methods, everyone was taught rules and responsibilities according to age and groupings, men or women together in age sets that cut across family or village loyalty. Sometimes the extended family was responsible for organizing and training people and for liaising with other similar extended family groups through councils of elders or elected chiefs. So relationships based on age and kinship were often very important. Even societies that had kings and more centralized political structures also used these other political institutions to organize people. One thing to note about most pre-colonial African society is that they involved many people in decision making, which historians describe as African forms of participatory democracy. Before 1500, most parts of Africa's societies had become highly developed in terms of their own histories. They also had complex systems of participatory government or were established powerful states that covered large territories and had extensive regional and international links. Many of these societies had solved difficult agricultural problems and had come up with advanced techniques of production of food and other crops. Some people were skilled miners and metallurgists, others were great artists in wood, stone, and other materials. Many of these societies had also amassed a great stock of scientific and other knowledge, some of it stored in the libraries such as those of Timbuktu in Mali, but some passed down orally from generation to generation. There was great diversity across the continent and societies were at different stages and levels of development. Most importantly, Africa had established their own economic and political systems, their own cultures, technology and philosophies that had enabled them to make spectacular advances and important contributions to human knowledge. But all these were disrupted by the transatlantic slave trade and subsequent colonization. You see, the transatlantic slave trade alone led to the loss of millions of lives and the departure of millions of those who could have contributed to the future of Africa. Because of the transatlantic slave trade, the continent increasingly unable to follow an independent path of development. The devastation of Africa through transatlantic slavery was accompanied by the ignorance of some historians and philosophers who negate its entire history. These ideas and philosophies suggested that, among other things, Africa had never developed any institutions or culture, nor anything else of any worth, and that future advances could only take place under the direction of Europeans or European institutions. But now you understand that Africa already had an established political, cultural, traditional and economic institution before European voyages to its shore. Africa was already civilized in many areas of life before the European colonization. So what do you think about Africa before colonization? Kindly share your thoughts in the comment below. Thank you.